Guitar Co-op Podcasts. Great Composers. Conceived and presented by Fabio Zanon. I really doubt anyone who listens to Taylor Swift's music is much interested in contextualizing the style in the tradition of Blondie or Madonna. We call classical a style of music that dialogues with its own history. That's why today we already have definitions like classic jazz or classic rock. But nobody could think of a history of rock that only deals with albums like Sgt. Pepper's or Pet Sounds or Led Zeppelin, whatever, without taking into account festivals or the counterculture or the expansion of TV or the internet. Many people understand, though, the history of classical music as a succession of masterpieces without taking into account the social context. This is Edson Lopez playing Variations Opus 101 by Mauro Giuliani that was released by Guitar Co-op. By the way, if you want to hear the pieces played in this episode in its entirety, you can just access the playlist that is in the description of this episode in your platform. Henry Rayner's book, Social History of Music, released in 1978, voiced this distortion. When I read this book, for the first time I realized that history is not made up of great mythical composers, but is made of normal people who looked for jobs, negotiated commissions, had to buy bread and wine or take care of their families. These geniuses, they had to compose their miraculous symphonies and operas amidst international conflicts, epidemics, economic crises, changes of fashion, and they were forced into entrepreneurship or risk spending their old age in poverty. This is Phil Goldenberg playing Caprice Opus 11 by Mauro Giuliani. There was an economic milieu that allowed Mozart and Beethoven to go further. The same thing happens in guitar music. It's almost never mentioned when we see history as a succession of masterpieces. But the guitar had, and in a certain way, still has a leading role in the lives of ordinary people and musicians. Drawing a parallel with literature, guitar music would be akin to chronicles or novels, as opposed to epic novels. Seen in this way, the central figure, in my opinion, in the history of guitar music is, without a doubt, Mauro Giuliani. This is Eduardo Fernandez playing a movement from Giulianate, L'Allegria by Mauro Giuliani. Giuliani was one of the most famous musicians in Habsburg Vienna at the end of the Napoleonic Wars. It was the Vienna of Haydn and Beethoven and the birthplace of our current industry of orchestras, opera, theaters, ticket sales, publishing, criticism, conservatoires, and the patronage system. Giuliani was the Ferrari of virtuosos, a man so exceptional that he became the yardstick by which all others were judged. Having lived and occasionally having worked with Haydn, Beethoven, Weber, Paganini, and Rossini, it is quite possible that no other guitarist in history has achieved the prestige of Giuliani. This is Wolfing Lieske playing Prelude No. 2, Opus 83 by Mauro Giuliani, which you can hear in our playlist that you can access in the description of this episode. Italy, as we understand, did not yet exist. It was a collection of independent kingdoms, loosely united by a common language. Giuliani was born in 1781 in Bisceglie and grew up in the nearby town of Barletta, both in Apulia, southern Italy. Later, he also appears to have come from Naples or Bologna, but this is not the case. His first instrument was the cello, and it seems that he also played the violin. We do not know with whom he studied the guitar, but he clearly developed exceptionally quickly on this instrument. He got married very young and had a son, moving with his family it seems to Trieste. From there, in 1806, he went to Vienna in search of new musical horizons, but without his family. This is Raffaella Smith playing La Chasse, Opus 109 by Mauro Giuliani. All the best Italian guitarists and mandolinists of the early 19th century went to live in other lands. Molino, Carulli, Castellacci, and Carcassi went to live in Paris. Moretti went to Spain as a soldier. Sagrini stayed in London, and Bortolazzi first went to Vienna until settling in Brazil, where he was very active and where he also died. Why did so many of them leave Italy? The main reason was economic. The only thing that was going well there was opera, but there was no paying class interested in instrumental music. In contrast, Vienna at that time was a miracle. It was a city of less than 70,000 inhabitants, with art everywhere. It was the capital of a powerful kingdom and home to a network of wealthy families. There was a large and well-off middle class, and almost everyone studied music for pleasure. Private lessons were profitable. There was music at social events, and the music publishing business was very vibrant. It is no wonder that all the greatest composers of that and all eras, I'm talking about Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, and Schubert, came to live in Vienna. This is Grand Potpourri, Opus 31 by Giuliani, played by Marco Tamayo. Giuliani arrived to Vienna with talent and charm, and more than that, he arrived with a new style. Until then, the guitar had been used almost exclusively to accompany songs at home. He arrived with a level of professionalism that was not yet there. His music did not only have good melodies and perfect harmony, he also used a new type of notation in which the stems of the notes were turned upwards when they were the melody and downwards when they represented the accompaniment. Listeners were ecstatic to hear a style of music that sounded complete and self-sufficient on the guitar, enhanced, of course, by a transcendent quality in his performance. This is Mario Gullo playing variations on Ruhm und Liebe, Opus 105 by Giuliani. Giuliani arrived in Vienna apparently in 1806. In 1807, he published music up to Opus 6. The first reference to him in the press says that a certain Giuliani is causing a sensation. He plays the guitar with unusual grace, skill, and strength. Vienna was a highly controlled city with soldiers and police everywhere. Musicians, famous or not, had to register with the police, and a tax was imposed on musical performances that was used for public safety. Giuliani's talent for music was only matched by his talent for making mistakes. In 1807, that is, less than a year into Vienna, he had an illegitimate first daughter, Maria, with a local woman called Anna Wiesenberger. This is Massimo Felici playing Gran Variazioni, Opus 114, by Giuliani. By 1808, he was already being called the Divine Giuliani by the Viennese press. The main music magazine said that he was the greatest guitarist who had ever lived, and the thing is, they were probably right. And that one had to hear him live to get an idea of his unusual precision and good taste. At the same time, there was a trend to always start the reviews with some insulting comment against the guitar, only to say later that Giuliani could extract good music even from such a limited instrument. In 1808, he already published a lot of music, including the Sonata Opus 15, which is a work of great originality and popular until today. This is David Russell playing the Sonata Opus 15 First Movement by Mauro Giuliani. In March 1808, Giuliani was present at the 76th birthday party of the most important composer in Europe at the time, Haydn, in the company of Beethoven, Salieri, and a host of other important musicians and noble people who attended a performance of the oratorio The Creation. Giuliani, often cited as one of the greats of that time, had his moment of glory a month later with the premiere of his first concerto for guitar and orchestra in A major, Opus 30, which is still today considered a masterpiece of the genre and hailed as the greatest work ever written and performed for this instrument in Germanic lands. This is John Williams playing the first movement of Giuliani's Concerto in A, Opus 30. I have always heard rumors that Hummel orchestrated this concerto, but there is no documentation to prove it. In any case, other works show Giuliani to be a more than competent orchestrator. If there's one thing that makes me mad is the lack of historical perspective. Judging what happened 200 years ago by today's standards. I have always heard criticism of this Concerto Opus 30 for the lack of formal development that would make it lesser than Beethoven or Mozart. Well, first of all, any composer of any time can hardly compare to Beethoven. That is very unfair. But the three concertos that Giuliani wrote for guitar are very close to the best of what was done at the time and compare more than favorably with works by Weber, Viotti, or Hummel. The idea that sonata form depends on motivic development has no basis on reality. It is an academic proposition a posteriori. The vast majority of music in this period has, in place of a development, a central contrasting section with virtuosity, drama, ostinatos, sudden changes of atmosphere, and different melodies. In this kind of writing, Giuliani is a master. This is Itzhak Perlman on violin and John Williams on guitar playing the Duo Concertante Opus 25 by Giuliani. In 1809, Vienna was invaded by Napoleon. Of course, there was a shortage of concerts then, but next year, Giuliani establishes a very useful relationship with the publisher Domenico Artaria. He also established the habit of playing a solo concert every year in the spring, in the month of May, at the Redutensaal, which was the smaller theater at the Imperial Palace. Nowadays, it's the President's Palace in Vienna. The local press praises his music to the skies. There is the idea of a Giuliani way of making music, which means writing a complete way, melody, harmony, and accompaniment on the same instrument. This is Pepe Romero playing the Handel Variations Opus 107 by Giuliani. By the way, you can listen to the complete pieces played in this episode in its entirety by accessing the playlist that we have very carefully prepared for you. In 1811, Giuliani apparently returned to Italy to see his son Michele, who was now 10 years old. It is not known exactly who Giuliani was with at that time, in fact. In 1813, another daughter was born. She was named Emilia, now Emilia Giuliani with his surname, but we do not know if he was from his first wife or if he was from a second marriage. Emilia, by the way, would become a notable guitarist and composer, and she was to be his main companion into his later years. In a few years, Giuliani had reached the mark of 33 published works. This is Riccardo Gallen playing variations on Fanchon, Opus 88 by Mauro Giuliani. Artaria encouraged Giuliani to compose more songs and more chamber music. These are, in my opinion, his best works. From 1812 onwards, chamber music predominated in his catalog, both for guitar duos and formations with other instruments and voice. Occasionally he went on to use a capotasto, which is a device that makes the guitar sound higher, which culminates in the use of a smaller, higher-pitched guitar called a tierce guitar because it was tuned a third higher than the normal guitar. He also gets recognition from Empress Maria Luisa, who gives him the title of Honorary Chamber Virtuoso, along with a ring studded with precious stones. This is the Romanza Marie-Louise de Austria, Opus 27 by Mauro Giuliani, sung by Rossana Bertini, accompanied by Davide Ficco. In 1812, his second concerto, Opus 36, also appears, which in my opinion, again, is his masterpiece in the genre. We are listening to Pepe Romero, playing with the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields, conducted by Neville Mariner, Giuliani's Concerto No. 2 in A major, Opus 36. During this period, Giuliani strengthens his relationships with luminaries of the time, sharing concerts with pianists like Hummel and Moscheles. Beethoven attended his performances and seems to have praised him, but I find it a bit sad to remember that probably Beethoven was very deaf at the time, and he must have had difficulty hearing Giuliani. In 1813, this relationship became closer when Giuliani played, presumably on the cello, along with all the most famous musicians in Vienna, at the premiere of the spectacular Symphony No. 7 and the most successful work of Beethoven's career, which is Wellington's Victory. Today, it is a piece of music that is almost forgotten and very poorly considered within Beethoven's output. But the Viennese public went nuts with the celebration of Napoleon's definitive defeat, and Giuliani was there in the orchestra. 1813 was the peak of his career. This is Wellington Sieg by Beethoven, Opus 91, played by the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields, conducted by Neville Mariner. Giuliani socialized with the musical elite of the imperial city and reached the milestone of having more than 60 published works. Other younger guitarists appeared, always playing music by Giuliani. In 1815, together with the violinist Mayseder and with Hummel, who was possibly the most prestigious composer in Vienna at this time, he created a series of subscription concerts that became known as Dukatenkonzerte, since the subscription fee was the exorbitant sum of 1 ducat. Both he and Hummel composed much chamber music for these concerts. This is Consortium Classicum playing Hummel's Grand Serenade, Opus 63. On the one hand, we have the famous musician Giuliani. On the other, we have the temptation of roguery. There is a police report that says a complaint has been filed against the well-known zither player Giuliani, in which he's said to be living in intimate relations with a certain Weisenberg, while leaving his wife and child to starve in Trieste or Venice. Giuliani has now been denounced as a pimp for people of high social standing. In view of this, his libertine lifestyle can no longer be tolerated. The police are to apprehend the suspect for a rough interrogation. I can only wonder what a rough interrogation means in this case. There is a context for Giuliani being accused of working overtime as a pimp. This was precisely the period of the Congress of Vienna, where the new political order of Europe was being discussed in order to secure a peace plan after the fall of Napoleon. The city for months became full of military people, dignitaries, spies, foreign diplomats, and consequently, sex workers. It is quite possible that Giuliani, who had access to high society, was also able to bridge the gap with the underworld. This is Julian Bream playing Giuliani's most famous solo piece, Grand Overture, Opus 61. It's not quite true that Giuliani was neglectful to his children, legitimate or not. Correspondence with his publisher in the following decade demonstrates his intense concern for the well-being of his children and of his elderly father. In 1816, Giuliani went on tour, playing in Prague, under the baton of none other than Carl Maria von Weber, Germany's top opera composer of the period, who also played the guitar, by the way. Weber, curiously, wrote a review of the concert in which he himself participated as a conductor, where after once again pointing out at the shortcomings of the guitar, he says that Giuliani exceeded all expectations. He praises the quality of the composition and orchestration, speaks of his agility, and above all, the control and delicacy of the cantabile. We don't know exactly which work was played on this occasion, but it may well have been his third guitar concerto in F major for terce guitar. Paolo Pugliese is accompanied by the Ensemble 800, conducted by Andrea Rognoni, in Giuliani's Concerto No. 3 in F major, first movement. After 10 years living in Vienna, Giuliani not only has a catalogue of over 100 published compositions, but also students who are beginning to carve a career for themselves. This includes Leonhard Schultz and the Polish child prodigy Jan Nepomucen Bobrowicz, who in a brief career left his mark on the world of the guitar. This is me playing Bobrowicz Grand Polonaise Opus 25. That is a release of GuitarCoop that you can listen in its entirety in the playlist that we have prepared for this episode and that you can access in the description. There is evidence that Giuliani also spent time with Franz Schubert. Let us remember that Schubert, who was also a guitar player, died at the age of 31, before his genius was recognized. Schubert would attend weekly soirees at the home of a certain Madame Fonandré, where Giuliani was also regular. At that time, Giuliani published vocal music of the highest order, which, at the lowest estimation, indicates interests similar to those of Schubert, who, as everybody knows, is the greatest songwriter of history. This is Marta Almajano, accompanied by José Miguel Moreno, in one of the 6 Ariete, Opus 95, Quando sarà quel dì, by Giuliani. It seems that at this time, the guitar star starts to decline in Vienna. Most concerts now feature guitarists only accompanying singers, and the published industry confirms this trend. After more than 10 years living in Vienna, Giuliani began to plan a return to Italy. There are also rumors that he was in debt, possibly gambling debts. In 1819, he spent a season in Venice and Trieste, where his parents now also lived. One gets the impression that he was testing the waters to decide where the best opportunities lay, be it Milan, Rome, or Naples. In Rome in 1820, he became a colleague of the 2 greatest Italian musicians of the time, Rossini and Paganini, with whom he also spent some evenings playing music. The 3 colleagues came to be known as the musical triumvirate. This is Julian Breen playing Rossiniana No. 1 by Mauro Giuliani. From Rome, he writes to the publisher Artaria, saying, "During my stay in Rome, I was able to write some musical pieces in a style previously unknown, except to the amazing mind of Rossini, who provided me with several of his originals so that I could transcribe what was most appropriate to me." He then offers several new works for publication, including a Gran Sonata Eroica and a Grand Potpourri called La Rossiniana. This type of fantasy, consisting of excerpts from operas with their respective variations and interludes, was not exactly a novelty, but Giuliani was not exaggerating, because no work of this period comes close to the ingenuity, instrumental quality, and dramatic impact of the first three Rossinianas. These are his masterpieces for solo guitar. This is Dave Russell playing the Rossiniana No. 3 by Mauro Giuliani. The enthusiasm garnered by their performances seems to contradict the claim that only opera thrived in Italy. At the same time, Giuliani seems to have come to his senses and sent his daughters to a Catholic boarding school, while his parents died in the midst of a dispute with his sister. He continues to seek professional opportunities in Naples, where the first signs of declining health also begin to appear in his correspondence. This is Riccardo Gayen playing the Folia d'España Variations, opus 45 by Giuliani. In Naples, he spent 3 years struggling. His correspondence with Viennese publishers shows that he was in trouble as he gradually accepted increasingly unfavorable commercial conditions, especially from the publisher who should be a friend, his fellow guitarist Anton Diabelli. By the way, he also had to sell the precious stones from this ring he had received from the emperors of Austria. Transfer of money between countries was also very precarious, and many of his agreements don't involve money cash, but sending a piano or paying off debts. At the same time, his daughter Emilia, who was now 12 years old, was a child prodigy and began to share concerts with her father. This is Federica Artuso playing Belliniana No. 3 by Emilia Giuliani Guglielmi. Plans to return to Vienna did not materialize, but he continued to publish music until his death on May the 8th, 1829, of unknown reasons at the age of 47. Jean-Pierre Rampal on flute, accompanied by René Bartoli on guitar, playing Duo Concertante, opus 85 by Giuliani. 4 years after Giuliani's death, the guitar craze reached Paris and soon after London. In London, his former students founded a guitar magazine called Giulianiad. This magazine not only testified to the persistence of his reputation as the greatest guitarist of his time, his students describe his new and superior way of playing the guitar, and they, as the keepers of such secrets, advertise to attract more students. This created an environment in which his Viennese publishers continued to publish works that had been shelved for 10 years after his death. Franz Halas playing Grand Sonata Eroica, opus 150 by Mauro Giuliani. His work did not survive the decline of the guitar in the mid-19th century. The generation that was responsible for the revival of the guitar in the 20th century, I'm talking about Tárrega, Llobet, Segovia, even the Austrian Luis Walker, simply did not know or appreciate his music enough. Only Segovia recorded a couple of pieces, but his rehabilitation is one of the most spectacular in music history. Julian Bream first recorded his masterpiece, the Concerto Opus 30, on an LP released in 1961, and from that moment a reappraisal began. His dramatic masterpiece, the Rossinianas, which had been forgotten for 150 years, were also recorded by Julian Bream in 1974. From then on, Giuliani once again became an essential name in the history of guitar and was once again recognized as a major figure in the musical life of early 19th century Vienna. This is duo Macari Pugliese playing Variations Concertin, Opus 130 by Giuliani. Giuliani composing practically every genre current in his time. The three concertos for guitar and orchestra are where we find, to me at least, the highest level of compositional skill. Some of the chamber works also contain material of unquestionable quality. Nigel North on guitar and Lisa Besnoziuk on flute playing Granduetto Opus 25 by Giuliani. Giuliani wrote only 3 solo works in sonata form, which was not, generally speaking, the focus of guitarist composers of this period. Even Fernando Sor, which was another master, also left only 4 works in sonata form. For solo guitar, most of his works fall into 2 genres, the theme with variations and the technical study. Although the one is a public genre and the other is a private one, they are interrelated, as many of the studies were clearly intended to help the student to negotiate the more difficult passages of the theme and variations. Another genre that was derived from the theme and variations was the fantasy or potpourri on popular themes, most of them extracted from Rossini's operas, and the 6 Rossinianas are the culmination of this style of writing. Each one of them has a slightly different form from the others and even give the listener the feeling of being transplanted into the opera house and watching the trailer of the drama that is about to unfold. This is Goran Krivokapic playing Rossiniana No. 4 by Mauro Giuliani. Giuliani gives us the feeling that he could have gone further. He had a perfect ear that produced natural and flawless music, an intuition for creating drama through virtuosity, and a creativity for interesting figurations. But he allowed himself to be guided by fashion, by the expectations of the public, and by the prescription of publishers. Hundreds of works he wrote always fall back on the same topics, the same models. There is no introspection ever. The music is always lively or lyrical, or somewhere in between those. This is Lucio Matarazzo playing one of Giuliani's studies. His work is not divided into phases. We do not perceive any kind of development between the young Giuliani and the mature Giuliani. He did supremely well what he felt confident to do, and knew that in this he was innovative. The mark he wanted to leave was clear, that of a virtuoso and composer capable of imposing the guitar within a skeptical musical environment. In this, he creates a line of continuity with the greatest virtuoso of the 20th century, which was Andrés Segovia. And listening to Giuliani, I want to thank, above all, Henrique Caldas for the technical work in this recording, and I would like to invite you to listen to the next episode next month, which will focus on Johann Caspar Merz, another great guitar virtuoso. Bye-bye, see you there. Guitar Co-op Podcasts. Great composers. Conceived and presented by Fabio Zanon.